I'm going to talk about John Green and his
Woo.
YA fiction. So, we're going to start with my feelings on John Green novels. So, I have read, and bear in mind this was probably, 7 years ago? A while ago. I read The Fault in Our Stars, Paper Town, An Abundance of Catherines, and Looking for Alaska.
I've read
So,
all of them except for Abundance of Catherine's.
right, well, you didn't miss out. I'm going to judge those novels. I've heard that his newer novels and the ones I haven't read are actually really good.
He's
But
still
I've not read
writing?
them. Yeah,
He's
still
still
writing.
he wrote after this?
Yeah, he had a book that I feel came out a year ago, and I've heard really good things about it. I don't know what it's
Oh.
about, but I've heard a lot of people recommend it. So I yeah, but I
Go
haven't
off.
read them, so I'm not gonna judge them, am I? And I didn't
No.
think there was any point me being like, I'm going to talk about books I haven't read anyway, even though I barely remember half the plots of these. So I feel like it was 2013, roughly the year, and everyone was saying to me like, "Oh, you need to read *The Fault in Our Stars.'" I was on Tumblr. Everyone was like, "Oh, read *The Fault in Our Stars.' It's incredible."
It
And
was
I just
everywhere.
don't really like when people recommend stuff to me. I think I've changed now, but like I feel like back then I was like, I don't know. You know when something would be really popular and people would recommend it to you, and I was like, there was just something that would be an aversion there for me. So, but everyone was recommending him, and I read a lot, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna read John Green, but purposely not read the book that everyone's recommended to me, which was a mistake. But
She's
also,
quirky.
write me into books, John Green. I'm quirky. Also, I was put off from the fact that it was a cancer story. I've never really liked teenage cancer love stories. I think they're just so like predictable, tacky.
Yeah.
I don't think they do anything for like the cancer community.
No.
They're never written by someone who's had cancer.
No, they're
And like
not.
it's not an authentic experience. It's about falling in love, and like I really don't think that that's what you're
Helpful.
worried about when you have cancer. And I like the
Yeah.
idea of showing people who are living with cancer having a normal life,
Yeah.
but I don't like the idea of being like, we're dying, so we're solely going to focus on love, and not the fact that like our family who have lived with us for our whole life are going to really miss their child. We're just going
Yeah.
to focus on the love story.
Yeah.
So I just don't love that. So I didn't want to read it. So I started with An Abundance of Catherines, and this really led to me just not really liking John Green's books. I think it would have been different if I started with The Fault in Our Stars. I've got to say, in Abundance of Catherines, I just find so boring.
Yeah,
I
what is it even? What's the plot?
well, I'll get into that because it basically has the same plot as all the other ones. Um, so,
Surprise!
as you may know, I don't love John's books, as I've just stated. Um, but I'm going to explain my reasoning for that. I'm going to kind of compare why I didn't like them when I was like 13, 14, and why I don't like them now. But also, just a disclaimer, I'm not hating on John Green. I'm not saying his books are bad categorically. I'm just saying I don't understand why they were successful, which is
Yeah.
different. So I'll start off with The Fallen Our Stars because it's an easy way to ease us in, and we have talked about it a lot. Um, and I'm just going to judge it on its own compared to the other ones because it's different from what I have labeled the whiny teenage boy narratives, which are all his other books. So I actually don't mind this book. I don't mind The Fault in Our Stars. When I actually read it, I was surprised that it wasn't as bad as I was expecting. It was narrated by a girl, which was kind of odd for John Green, because as I've said, all the others are whiny teenage boys. It was a quick read. The others are so slow. They're
Mm.
so slow and hard to get through. This, like, I think I read it in like 1 or 2 days. I remember just flying through it, not really just whipping through it. But the others were just so hard. Yeah. So this is just personal. I just think I prefer with when I read young adult novels, they're all kind of written in first person, which I don't love anymore. But then it's easy to read. But I don't really love reading like male for first person. I
You're
just
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 tired
didn't
of
really
it.
care.
Yeah.
Especially when you're a teenage girl, you don't really, I don't know, you can't, I think it's hard to relate to,
Yeah.
like, especially because I mean this mainly in terms of, like, John Green's male narratives just seem so annoying and so unrealistic. Like, I
Yeah.
was reading these narratives from the male point of view, and it was like no teenage boy that I ever knew. I've never
Mm.
known a teenage boy like the ones he writes about. And so it just seemed so unrealistic and they were annoying. Whereas Hazel in Fault in Our Stars, like, she is intelligent, she is slightly pretentious, but not to the extent that these boys
No.
are.
No.
These guys' whole personality is the fact that they're pretentious, smart people. Hazel's is that she's smart, she has cancer, so
She's got another dimension to her than
she's
just.
quirky. She's different. Also, I think I've told you about this before that like I have like a semi conspiracy theory that I just don't think John Green wrote The Fault in Our Stars. It doesn't feel like it was written by him. It's not like any of the books he's written. I just can't believe that this man went from writing like really slow whiny boy narratives to something that I think read completely different. I think that
Wow. I haven't
yeah,
heard you
well,
say that
obviously,
actually. I'm
well, I
intrigued.
don't fully mean it because of course he did read it, but like that's how different I find them. They don't feel like they're written by the same person. I think if you took the covers off and the name off the books and you just gave them to people, they think the three of them were by the same person and they think The Fault in the Stars was by someone completely different.
Mm.
But yeah, I just don't love it because The Fault in Our Stars I don't love because it does seem to me like it was just sad for the sake of being sad.
Mm.
It's like, oh, here's another dose of sadness for you. Oh, you were already sad that this girl had cancer. Well, the love interest also has cancer now. Like, okay, it's just taken cancer love teenage story one step further than like
Mm-hmm. Give them both it.
we don't just have the sick teenage girl. We now have sick teenage boy who's exactly the same as her. Um, so that I just didn't love, and like I said before, I would have kind of liked to have seen like Hazel's relationship with her family take more prominence and like being like, I mean, she doesn't know her prognosis really, but she spends all her time with Gus and no time
Yeah.
with her family. And I just think if I was her family, I'd be like, I kind of want to spend more time with you because
Yes,
you get
you
the
are my
family's got.
child.
Yeah. So that
And
was
maybe she wouldn't have, if she spent more time with family, maybe she wouldn't have ended up having her first kiss in the Anne Frank house.
I haven't even written notes on that. I didn't. Even, I think I just blocked that out. Okay, another reason I don't like Fault in Our Stars is because of that. Here's a message: if you go to the Anne Frank house, please don't do
Don't
that.
do it.
Please just be
Mm-mm.
respectful.
Yeah.
If there's like a ranking of people who've been most insensitive in the Anne Frank house, it's like number 3 is people who take way too many selfies. Number 2 is Justin Bieber.
Yep.
And number 1 is Hazel and Gus. They just were way too insensitive in that house. How old were they in Fault in Our Stars? Like 18?
I feel like she might be 16, 17. I don't
Okay.
think they're.
They just like went to Amsterdam, like a massive drug place, and they not one of them was like, should we get some edibles? I'm not saying they should have because they both had cancer, but I just feel like in a realistic novel about teenagers,
Yeah, the
that
teenagers in
would have been
Amsterdam.
something that was discussed. I'm not encouraging it. I'm just saying I feel like it would have been discussed. Like they would have been like, oh, we can easily get drugs, so like, should we? You want to try? I just think that would have been discussed. Anyway, moving on from what is a perfectly reasonable novel with some weird bits to the whiny boy narratives. So this is probably the main reason I didn't like his books. They were so predictable.
Hmm.
This is mainly talking about An Abundance of Catherine's, Paper Towns, and Looking for
Looking for
Alaska,
Alaska.
which was another one that people recommended to me so much. And I
Yeah,
think the last
everyone
one I
loved
read,
it.
yeah, they did, didn't they? It was the last one I think I read of his, and I really don't like that book. I remember really not enjoying it, but it wasn't boring. I just remember I didn't enjoy that one.
It was
Um,
long ago. I see. I know what you like. Looking back, I know
oh,
what you mean where they were long. Like there
yes,
wasn't really a point. And I know. And I mean, Looking for Alaska, she dies, but
yeah,
like it takes a long time to get to that point, which sounds really bad.
yeah.
But
I
like,
feel like I have. like half the book, I was just because I knew she was gonna die, or you know something bad's gonna happen to her, and the whole
Yeah.
time I was like, okay, when is this happening? This is so boring. Also, I'm never really sure who his intended audience is because
Mm.
they're written for young adults, but this book like contains some like sexual scenes. That like so I didn't know I was reading them at 13, 14, which is the age I think they're intended for, but then they
Quite
had some
adult
adult
content.
themes, and I know that now some people are studying the book in school, and
Oh.
some schools have made big complaints about it because they like. I'm gonna say it was schools in America because I don't know that I, I don't know that schools in
Wouldn't be on
England
the
would have the
curriculum
same
here.
complaint. They do. They wouldn't be on the curriculum for one, but also I feel like you do have some wildly inappropriate books on the curriculum in England sometimes. Like
Mm.
anyway, so I'm gonna say the reason I didn't like this is those three books seem exactly the same to me. When I was thinking about them, I was like, oh, I'm really struggling to differentiate what happened in each book, which character's which, and stuff like that. And it's because the books just are the same, basically. They follow the same structure each time. And they don't read like normal teenagers. It's like these weird hybrid teenage boys that are just the same teenage boy in each three books.
Mm.
So the characters in the formula are all the same. So all I can really remember because of this is the basic plot of each one. So I remember An Abundance of Catherines is about a whiny boy dating girls called Catherine, and that's it. Paper Towns is about a whiny boy chasing after a quirky girl, and Looking for Alaska is about a whiny boy obsessing over a quirky girl. So they're all the same. And then I remember the quirks that each boy had, but again, they sort of blur into one, and I really struggled
Mm.
to figure out which quirk belonged to which boy. So what I've realised, this is what quirk belonged to each boy, I think, and they're interchangeable. Remember, so in Abundance of Catherine's, his quirk is that. Also, I'm not giving them names because again, they're all the same
They
boy.
don't. Yeah, they don't need
They don't
individual
need
names
names.
because they don't have
They could
individual
be the same
characteristics.
boy. Yeah. So in Abundance of Catherine's, his quirk is that he's only dating girls named Catherine, and also he loves anagrams, which is super annoying in the book. He just does
Ugh.
anagrams all the time, and half of the anagrams are only anagrams because the original word is spelt wrong. So when John Green was writing it, he clearly like had thought of the word he wanted to get from the anagram, and then just spelt a bunch of words wrong together. So that's annoying. Gets tiring after about 10 pages. In Paper Towns, I actually can't remember a quirk that this boy has, other than he like really loves rules. So it might just be that he loves rules. But again, he could have one of the other boys' quirks. I honestly don't remember. They all merge for me. But Paper Towns, I just think it's really boring. So never
It's
mind.
really boring. But they made it into a film, which is
I
nuts.
watched that film as well, and it was still boring.
It was so bad. I remember watching it when we were like, I don't know, 15, and we were literally there like, oh, what are we doing here?
My brother has to watch it, and I was like, oh, God. Strap yourself in for the most boring ride of your life. So then in Looking for Alaska, the whiny teenage boy is obsessed with people's last words, which again gets
Oh
super
yeah.
tired. Yeah, it just gets tiring. Like doing it a couple of times fine, but I feel like every other page he was like, and this person said on their deathbed, and it's like, okay, we get it, you're quirky, you're different. But my point is, as you can see there, all these books are about whiny teenage boys obsessed with girls, which don't really care to read about as a teenager, just me personally. And also boys that have weird quirks that just are really unrealistic and tiring.
Hmm.
So my final complaint, which comes on from that, which I strongly felt as a teen, and I strongly feel now, is against John Green's female love interests in the book. They're so two-dimensional
Yep.
and purely written as she's different. She's not like other girls, and that's so like
Meh.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was the problem in all young adult literature. I feel like I've read that a lot. I read so many young adult books that were about girls, and they were described as like, oh yeah, I never really had any girlfriends. Like I'm not like other girls. Like my brother taught
Yeah.
me how to. Like I have loads of brothers, so I know how to hit. I just never enjoyed reading.
It's just
I think
misogynistic, isn't it?
I guess like at the time I didn't know. I didn't like know to label it as misogynistic. I think
No, I didn't
I
either.
think I was just reading it and I was like, but I'm like other girls. Like I like
Yeah.
dressing up and makeup and meh. But I also like the things she's talking about, and it never sat right with me. I was just like, this feels wrong. And then when I was older, I learned that it was misogyny. So
it was misogyny all along.
I just feel like, oh, I feel like it happened a lot. Anyway, that's not my point. So I didn't enjoy reading his books because it was like I especially didn't like reading about those girls from like a man's perspective. And this mainly happens in Paper Towns and Looking for Alaska. I don't know if it happens in Abundance of Catherine's because the book was so boring, and all I can remember is that he was obsessed with dating Catherine's, but he doesn't end up with Catherine. That's it. So I'm not going to really address that from now on. So supposedly, this, like, the way John Green writes these teenage girls is to dismantle the trope of the manic pixie dream girl.
Okay, no.
Well, we'll get into that, but what we're going to do first is we're just going to give a brief, quick explanation of what the manic pixie dream girl is. So essentially, it's just a really two-dimensional presentation of a woman. They don't really have a personality. They're just quirky. They're there to, like, help men grow. They have nothing of their own. But what I've discovered is that basically there is a really basic way to create a manic pixie dream girl, and it is by picking a traditionally bad trait that a person could have, then a good trait that a person could have, and then that equals a quirky girl. So I thought we could come up with some ourselves. So like, for example, you would have she would never brush her hair, but she was obsessed with Virginia Woolf. Just like really, like one of them is just kind of like, if you actually met this person, they'd be terrible, and then one's like, oh well, that's actually a good quality. So like, she never showered, but she danced in the rain, like that sort of thing.
Like she collects all the same plants that a famous composer did, and recreating a room in the house that was like,
yeah, exactly like that. That's the way to do it. You have to kind of pick habits that are so close to being on the verge of just terrible things to do. And that's the trick to having a manic pixie dream girl. They have to be like semi-terrible, but the way that they're talked about is like, oh, that's different. She's cool. Anyway, so I obviously didn't know this term when I was a teenager, so I had no way of defining these girls as manic pixie dream girls. I just thought they were quirky for quirky's sake. It was weird. And when I was researching this, my first thought was manic pixie dream girls, because I'm an adult now, I know the term, and they pop into my head all the time when I think about that term. He writes, basically all his female characters are just manic pixie dream girls. So I looked it up. Basically everything I could find was people saying, he's just dismantling the trope, meh, because he said this a lot, basically. But I think that if he is doing this, it's not done very well for two reasons. One, if there is a book that's going to dismantle this trope, I don't really think that it should be written by a man who, throughout the book, utilizes the trope and only dismantles it at the very end.
Yeah.
Like, the whole way through the book, you're being like, manic pixie dream girl, love her.
Quirky girl, quirky girl, quirky girl. And then there's no part of it that, there's no overt dismantling. It's not like, in what is it, Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind? Like, she doesn't live up to his fantasy. She like fights against it throughout the whole film, and she says explicitly, like, people just keep putting this ideal onto me. That's dismantling it.
Exactly.
And it might, do you think it's like, do people compare it to 500 Days of Summer, where that was supposed to be a dismantling of the trope as well, but people just hated against her because...
Exactly. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Like, I don't think you realise it's a dismantling if someone is utilising it so much. Like, he isn't showing how terrible it is. And like you say, a good example of that is Eternal Sunshine. And Ruby Sparks, I don't know if you've seen that, but
I really enjoyed Ruby Sparks.
It's just about like this man who writes a woman into existence, and like and also it's written by a woman. The movie is written by Zoe Kazan, so it's from kind of her perspective, I guess, and he writes this woman, and she's never what he wants her to be, because
even when he can write everything he wants,
and that's a dismantling. That's a good dismantling.
Yes.
They don't utilize the trope throughout. Like, they're not being like, how wonderful is this girl because she's different. Throughout, they're being like, this is actually terrible. That's how to dismantle it. So that's number one. Number two, the second reason I don't think he does this is an article that's on Medium, and it was written by Vin McCarthy, and it's called Why Are Manic Pixie Dream Girls Still a Thing? This is the most incredible article. You all need to go read it if you can. I'll link it below. But it basically just ripped apart the idea that John Green was dismantling anything. So it addresses this essay that John Green wrote that's called The Destruction of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. And in this essay, I guess because he wasn't clear enough showing it in his books, he basically explains how his books deconstruct the trope, specifically Paper Towns. And the article truly becomes iconic when it states, truly, it's a monument to his talent that he was able to write the article with no hands, being as he was simultaneously patting himself on the back and jerking off to one of his own signed headshots, which is just incredible. So basically, John Green in the article is just arguing that Margot from Paper Towns isn't a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, and it's only the whiny teenage boy who thinks she is one. So he says, basically he's saying that it's only the boy that sees her as that. The book doesn't. The book follows the boy's narrative, so you're just following like this unreliable narration that is saying like, oh, she's a manic pixie dream girl, but you're not meant to believe that, even though that's what the narrator is saying. Which obviously is going to be difficult, but the article rebukes that point and says that it absolutely does show that the trope exists in it, and he, like John Green, perpetuates the trope throughout and never holds himself accountable for using it. So go read that article. It's a much better way of explaining why these books weren't great to read than I will ever do. I really recommend it. So that's kind of why I didn't love his books as a child. But I will say, just in a quick final point, a quick defense of John. I don't love the books. That doesn't mean they're bad books. It just means I personally didn't love those tropes. Yeah. And also, all the books I talked about that I didn't like were written in, like, they're pretty old now. So Looking for Alaska was written in 2005.
Oh my god.
And Abundance of Catherine was 2006. And then Paper Towns was 2008. So they're old. So his presentations aren't going to be the most up to date. Yeah. But I do genuinely think he was probably trying to do something woke. I think he was probably trying to show the Manic Pixie Dream Girl as bad, but I just don't know that it was done very well. But I do think there was an attempt, and so I don't think that makes him a bad person at all. Also, The Fault in Our Stars, the one book that I actually didn't mind, was written the most recently in 2012, and then his more recent books are the ones I've heard really good things about. So maybe he has progressed now, and his books aren't as boring, and I would maybe actually enjoy them. So I think people maybe like to hate on him because he is very well known. His name is very out there. Like, he's very famous. But there's a lot of young adult books that are terrible and have terrible messages, and we don't hate on the people who wrote them as much. And he gets a lot of hate, so much so that recently I saw on Hank Green's TikTok, who's John Green's brother, if you don't know, he had to put a message out saying, please stop telling me how much you hate my brother and how much better I am than him, because obviously I don't want to hear that. It doesn't make me feel good. It makes me feel sad. Yeah, and people were thinking, like, I think people commenting about a lot, like, you're so much better than John. John's so terrible, which isn't nice. Like, he's not, I don't think he's a bad person. I think maybe he's just not written the best things. So, like, I think
like 15 years ago. Like,
some people really enjoy them. I don't think that's a reason to hate on someone. Also, quickly, Crash Course in general, which is him and Hank's YouTube channel, is so incredible. So
it's
I do
amazing,
think he's a good person. The fact they came up with that, which if you don't know, teaches like lots of little lessons really fast. At A level, there was some things that I could only learn through watching Crash Course videos. Like, I could not learn them without that. So I do think that he's a good person. I think he's trying his best. Don't think he did a great job sometimes, and I don't like his books, but that's personal. Please do not hate on this man. Anyway, I'm done.